Indeed. All right, everybody. Thank you so much, everybody at Royal LePage, for tuning in today to this webinar. It's Mike here, manager of Royal LePage Learning Services. And just before we get started, and I'm going to kick it off, and I'm not going to try to talk too much. We got a lot of important people we want to talk. I just want to remind you guys of a few things. Number one is the chat. So you should see the chat. If you're on your desktop, it should be at the bottom of the window. You should see a chat option. And if you're on mobile, you might see it under the three-dot menu. So there might be a three-dot menu at the bottom right. You might need to click on that three-dot menu and hit the chat. Now, the next thing is when you go to the chat, I want you to notice and be very careful about this. It says to all panelists and attendees, all panelists. And I think it's great if you guys just want to, if we want to set that chat to all panelists and attendees, that way everybody can see the chat. We can all continue to keep communication open, and we can feel like we're all here together. Because, in these times, this is the most interaction we can get via keyboards, right? So just in terms of the chat, just make sure you change it to all panelists and attendees. And then the other thing is, sorry, I'm just typing that in. There we go. So I see some people. And yes, indeed, some people are asking, is it muted? Yes, we're in webinar format here. So, excuse me. We're in webinar format here. So that means that we're, nobody's going to be chiming in. If there was anything we really needed to, it's best to ask the questions in the Q&A. And that's the next side of this. At the bottom, you should see Q&A. And if you click on that Q&A, you'll have an option to ask questions. And we're going to be pulling from that Q&A near the end of the webinar. So again, the chat, just make sure you put it to all panelist attendees. That way everybody can see the Q&A. Please use that for questions. And I'm going to kick it over to Kelly for introductions.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike. We're really delighted to have Chris Leader as our speaker today. Chris has been a longtime partner of Royal LePage. He has delivered training to many of you across our network of agents and brokers. And he's also been a keynote speaker at countless Royal LePage events over the years. Royal LePagers from across the country are very grateful for the impact that he's made on their business. Today, Chris will give again and help us navigate changing waters and prepare our business and, most importantly, our pocketbooks to weather the uncertainty. So thank you for joining us, Chris. But of course, before we start with Chris, we're going to turn it over to our fearless leader, Phil Soper, who's going to give us a bit of an update. And Phil will also be sticking around for the duration of the webinar and answering your questions at the end of Chris's presentation today. Over to you, Phil.
Hey, thanks, Kelly, and thanks, Mike. Welcome to, gosh, what is it, week 4 of home imprisonment, Royal LePage style. We are getting better and better at this, aren't we? I don't know how I am making things work, but I seem to be struggling through, just kidding, the weeks and adapting to this strange way to do work. Surprising amount of business still being written across the country, but we know there are some difficult weeks ahead. It's a world in which our actions of 2 weeks ago are going to be determining what comes up. So really looking forward to what Chris has to share with us. Every week, we will be bringing you some insight from industry luminaries, things to help you stay productive, to stay positive, and most importantly, to prepare for the rush of business that will come when we have tackled this huge health crisis that I know is first and foremost in everybody's mind. So with that, Chris is going to start with some thoughts, and then we will have a conversation. He'll ask me some questions, I'll ask him some questions, and then we'll, of course, turn it over to you and take your chat questions from the field. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Kelly, Mike, and everybody that took time this morning to come out. I very much appreciate it, and very thankful for the relationship I have with Royal LePage. As Phil was saying, we're going into week 4. When this all started a few weeks ago, we were initially told that it was going to be a couple of weeks. We shelter inside, the virus is going to pass. And I think one of the challenges we've had as time has gone on, there's what we would refer to as almost a creeping delay. It keeps getting pushed out. It looks like, from what I've read so far, we're looking at approximately 10 weeks in total. And that's a long time to be down in terms of a commission business. So I want to talk about some of the challenges that we're up against with that. And, you know, for me, if you give me a finish line and you say, okay, 10 weeks, 3 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever the number is, if I've got a target, I will strategize my priorities and organize stuff to make sure I use that time wisely. But I think the difficult part is that we haven't up to this point been given that really strict finish line. I think when we first started down this path a couple of weeks ago, or maybe almost a month ago now, it almost felt like we were given a forced vacation, and we all took a little time to enjoy that experience a little bit. But after we've got sort of all the honey-do list done around the house and the project stuff, it gets a little more complicated now when we have two spouses working from the same office at home, or the kids are in the background running around and they're a bit of a distraction from stuff. So we've got some unusual challenges, but we've got some great opportunities. I think one of the difficult parts has been the uncertainty, and it's not like this is a regular recession. Because of the uncertainty that goes around with it. I was telling Phil that this is, for me now, this is 5 recessions since I started my real estate career. And recessions are, you could say all of the recessions are different, and they are, but the tactical strategies we use to move out of a recession are virtually the same. When I go back and look, I started in '81 and we had high interest rates that were designed to combat the runaway inflation we had at the time. So we had 21% interest rates. 1990, we had an oil crisis. 10 years later, we had the dot-com bubble burst. 8 years after that, in 2008, we had the mortgage debacle down in the US. They call it the Great Recession. And now it's 12 years later, and we have the virus. All of these recessions were caused by different things, but strategically, the tactical stuff you need to do every day is to work ourselves out of it is virtually the same. So I want to talk about really actionable items, things that you can do that can have a positive effect. And just to kind of kick this off, I really have 3 categories that I think are important. The first one is staying healthy, both physically and emotionally, and why that's important. The second one is staying productive during this period of time. What can you actually do when it's not necessarily politically correct to be out holding open houses? What can you do from a business perspective that's going to have an impact, organize and structure, and allow you to come out of the gate quickly when the market opens up? And finally, I think the most important item is managing your finances. So categorically talking about health and some of the things we need to do, I would recommend that you stay away from all of the conspiracy theories on the internet. There's all kinds of crazy ideas out there, and people are, in terms of the conspiracy stuff. So my suggestion is always look to the government websites to give you really clear and concise information moving forward. Second thing I'm going to suggest to you is exercise. And it's not like you can get to the gym right now if you're a gym rat. It's not like you can participate in your running club right now. But there are things we can do. And it's often said, when your body moves, your mind grooves. So it's important that you stay active. Activity could be, and Tina and I have been doing this, we've been going for a walk in our neighborhood. We're very thoughtful to keep our 6 feet of distance from anybody that we see. But we know we have to get out and get some air, stretch. So we've been doing a 5 or 8K walk just about every day or every second day. I'd recommend something similar to make sure that you're getting out and getting some exercise. If that's not the case, maybe you live in a really urban setting and it's just difficult to give yourself that 6-foot distance between people, then there's nothing to say you can't or exercise at home. There's all kinds of yoga classes and exercise classes you can Google. And I think anybody can do push-ups, sit-ups, crunches and planks at home. The next thing I want to suggest is that when we first forced into this almost forced vacation, we were all told to go out and get supplies. And of course, we hit the grocery stores and we came back with all kinds of comfort food, things we thought we were going to need to shelter in place. But the one thing I want us to be thoughtful about is when we finally can get out and get moving, we want to make sure we didn't add 10 extra pounds this spring because we've been sitting at home really eating the ding dongs and watching Netflix. So in terms of staying emotionally up, I think it's important. Positive affirmations. Affirmations are something we would have done years ago. And I haven't seen them used in a long time, but first person, present tense, positive thoughts put out into the universe was something I was taught as a salesperson. I would go on to say it's important to maintain a routine in your life. It's very easy. I was talking to one of the managers down south last week, and he was finding him and his teenage boys had fallen into the bad habit of eating dinner at 10 o'clock, and they were watching television till like 1 and 2 in the morning and getting up late. None of that is going to be very effective, and you're not going to get anything done if you get your internal clock turned upside down. So I'd recommend that you maintain some normalcy. I would get up early, hydrate, stretch, meditate, do some yoga maybe, meditate or pray for 15 minutes on what the day is going to look like. Do your 30-minute walk, great breakfast, get back, and then time block your hours to do some really productive stuff. I think this is a good example right now of all of the different social media platforms, all of the video conference platforms we're using. I think in the last week, I've used Teams, Skype, WebEx, and Zoom. So from that perspective, I think it would be good if we were very familiar with the different platforms so that when we are talking with clients, we can have a two-dimensional conversation. It's not as good as being there, but it's certainly better than just having a telephone call. The next thing I would say emotionally, making sure that you are staying connected is stay informed, but don't get fixated. I think it's really easy right now to get sucked into Fox and CNN on that 24-hour news cycle. You know, if it bleeds, it leads. They sensationalize stuff. I do think it's really important that you stay informed. But let's not turn the entire day into being glued to the television watching Fox News. This is just not good for us. I'd recommend that, you know, maybe catch the news first thing in the morning and then turn it off for the rest of the day and get on with the rest of the day. And then maybe at the end of the day, just check in to see what happened on the news at the 6 o'clock news or the 10 o'clock news. I think this next week is going to be a really tough week. I was on coaching call this morning with our coaches, and coming out of the US in terms of leadership, they're talking about this is going to be a really tough week in terms of numbers. So if that's the case, I think it's important that we're thoughtful about how much negative news we take in, because if you take in all that negative energy, it's easy to understand what comes back out with that negative energy. I would avoid mindless television and binging on Netflix. I know for the first week we had a bit of an excuse. We got some potato chips and we got some cold beer and we were watching binging on one of those series. But it's time to get serious about stuff and make sure we stay in tip-top form to be able to capitalize on the real estate market that's coming. There's a great market coming. So if you are going to binge on television, then let's binge on TED Talks. Let's binge on watching Masterclass. And if you're not familiar with Masterclass, take some time to investigate it. I think you'll find it would be a really worthwhile investment of time to take a look at what makes somebody exceptional in their field. I would use this time to read. You know, one of the common things I hear from people is you never have any time to read. Well, now you have time to take out some really good books. And there's lots of good books out there that you should consider reading right now. One of the books that's an all-time favorite for any time the world has changed is Who Moved My Cheese? Everybody should have a copy of that. And if you have a copy, I would suggest that you go back and reread it again. I would also recommend that you look at Jeffrey Gitmer's book, The Little Black Book of Relationships, because relationships are going to be one of the key areas that you're going to tap into to get your business up and rolling again. It's going to be our sphere of influence, and our farm neighbors, people that we have relationships with, will help jumpstart our business. That jumpstart will happen quicker for salespeople that are staying connected with people. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So all I'm saying is there's some really good stuff to do. I would also take a look at our video conferencing, and I'd recommend that you set up some mastermind groups right now. maybe 5 or 6 people from the office, like-minded people who are committed to a schedule. And you guys could do some role playing on your digital listing presentations right now, for instance, or how to use even our video conferencing more effectively, how to get more comfortable with getting documents signed. One of the things that a mastermind might do is if you posed a question to everybody, or a challenge or a problem that we might be having, their goal would be to bring some solutions to that meeting and share those solutions with people. And there are solutions for all of the problems you're facing out there. I know that right now this seems unique. The cause might be unique, but the solution isn't. And I'll talk about that in a minute. I'd also recommend that you look at doing some journaling. And in terms of journaling, emotionally, some really good ideas might be to journal on all of the things we're grateful for. Let's constantly remind it how fortunate we are and how blessed we are and who's important in our life. And we'll make a point of talking to people and letting them know how we feel. So emotionally, physically, let's stay active. Let's stay on schedule. Let's time block our calendar. Let's make sure we're getting the most out of this time. It's really critical. And that leads me into the next part of the number 2 category I wanted to talk to you about, was staying productive. Now, a lot of salespeople will turtle. I don't want you to turtle. What I mean by turtle is stick their head in the sand and just hope this whole thing goes by and they can kind of come out of hiding when it's all over. Well, that's not how we deal with problems. Problems don't go away if you ignore them. Typically, they just get bigger. So my suggestion is not to ignore this and to use this time very effectively. Number 1, I'm going to suggest that you prospect for business. And you're going to say, prospect? How am I going to prospect? Let me give you some passive, elegant ideas on activities that would contribute to your success. How's that sound? I'm not suggesting we go door knocking right now. I'm not suggesting that we hold open houses. But what I am saying is you could get up every day, and before you even have your morning cup of coffee, you could come up with dollar-producing activities that could generate future opportunities. My suggestions would be: send out 5 emails to people in your database every morning, 5 different people. Little note to them, letting them know that they were on your mind through these challenging times. I would send out 5 text messages every morning to 5 different people. I would handwrite 5 handwritten cards and put them out snail mail. I would do 5 social media posts every morning, either post to my site or comment on somebody else's, or a combination thereof. And my 5th suggestion would be to send out 5 slide dials. Now, what is a slide dial? It allows you to call people without ringing their telephone and automatically put your voice message into their mailbox. So they won't even know that you left a message until they look and they say, oh, look, I've got a message. I didn't hear my phone ring. And there's a message from Chris from Royal LePage, reaching out and leaving something just as a touch point. Now, these 5 activities could be done before the rest of the world wakes up. But if you think about it, if you reached out to 25 people in your database this week, that would be, or this day, or every day, sorry, 25 people a day, that would be 125 people a week. That would be 500 people a month, 6,000 people a year. And if you only converted 2.5% of those touch points, that would be 15 deals that you would have sitting in the hopper. I don't know where you are in the country, and I don't know what your average sale price is, but let's just say it was $5,000 or maybe even $10,000. We could be looking at something as simple as $150,000 on activities that you participated in before 8 a.m. every morning, that are designed to elegantly reach out, remind people that you're here should they need any help or assistance with anything, and that you were thinking of them. But you know, a small percentage of that business is going to the seeds you plant will convert to opportunities. Many agents feel they can't prospect right now. So it's more about warm calls than it is about cold calls. So if you were asking me what activity can I do, I would suggest that you make warm calls to everybody you know right now and have conversations. And I'll talk to you in a minute about what to say. People often focus on what they can't do. There's lots of things we can do. I would recommend that you time block an hour every day to update your CRM system. Let's make sure that you've got all your CRM set up the way you wanted it to, your customer relationship management. Every person has up-to-date contact information. Now, my suggestion is if you are missing fields from your contacts, this is a really good reason to call people and just say, hey, I'm quarantined, I'm sequestered, I'm not supposed to go out, so I'm looking for activities. I knew you guys most likely would be home. I thought I would reach out. I needed to fill in some information. And of course, it's a touch point, you're going to talk. Now, what's interesting about this is I had one of my coaching students this morning, I got an email saying, I'm missing information, could you fill it in? They sent me an email. And I thought to myself, I understand the administrative function of having a full effective CRM system. But the other part, from a sales guy's perspective, because that's what I am, I'm a salesman. My perspective is this is a great opportunity for me to reach out and call everybody and have conversations with people. How are you doing? What's going on? What are you doing to keep keep the family occupied? And always the conversation about real estate will come up. They'll ask you how you're conducting your business right now or how you're doing stuff. And of course, your knowledgeable information about how you're dealing with it, protocols, what you can and can't do, how you've come up with workarounds using Matterport, videography, photography, all of that is beautiful. And of course, it really says to them, wow, this person's really dialed in. Then I would make sure that anybody in your CRM system is in downlines or funnels so that you have campaigns going out, digital campaigns going out. And in saying that, when we're talking about our digital campaigns, I would, again, if you have campaigns set up in your system so that you don't come across as being insensitive, you need to take a look at the campaign materials that are set up and that are going out. We want to make sure that it doesn't feel all salesy. For a typical spring market, we want to make sure that we are connected socially in terms of all of the things that are necessary in the marketplace right now. So make sure the message that's going out in reference to is got some sort of reference to the virus, and that it's thoughtful, it's timely, and obviously it's not just being something that's being regurgitated by digital message. I would recommend that you time block an hour every day to clean up your technology. One of the things we discovered was how challenged people can be around technology, and yet this is going to be a great opportunity for us to learn so much more about our systems, our software, and even making sure we have the right hardware. Computer files, let's make sure we delete the stuff we're not needing anymore on our system. Let's move stuff to cloud storage and understand how Google Drive works, for instance, with you guys, so that you have you're comfortable and understand how cloud storage works. I would clean up all your emails, delete all of the stuff in your inbox that's not necessary, move them to subfolders, get rid of the subfolders you're not using. And the last piece of advice in that category I would have, and if you haven't done it, this is a great time for you to synchronize your hardware. So anything that you delete on your tablet computer will automatically delete from your smartphone. Too often I find people's hardware isn't talking. So this is really a great time for a hardware update and a software audit to make sure system-wise you're really functioning well. It'll give you an opportunity to explore some of the programs that you have that maybe you're not really familiar with or as comfortable with as you would like to be. I put a calendar every day. I put an hour on your calendar every day for education. Video conferencing, like I said, is more important than ever. Understanding how to use Zoom, how to use FaceTime, how to use Skype, all of that stuff would be important. If you haven't had an opportunity, we have a great online sales program called the Leaders Edge Virtual Training System. You're welcome to go to our website, Leaders Edge Training, and investigate that if you wanted to sharpen your skills during this period of time. And most importantly, I would suggest that you research market stats, that you have an idea sort of what the market did pre-virus, and you should be tracking everything that's going on during the virus. So as we come out of it and you're sitting down with a seller, you're going to be able to talk really knowledgeably about micro conditions at the local level, at a grassroots level, on how the marketplace, your marketplace, is being affected right now. So let's make sure we understand our MLS data really thoroughly. Now, the last piece is the piece that I think is most important. Often it was said to me that you, as a teacher, you teach the things you needed the most. For me, it was the recession of 1990. It was my second recession. My first recession, I started in 81. The market was tough, and I just, as the 80s went on, I had put that recession in my rearview mirror and literally had forgotten about it. As we moved into the 1990 recession, it became really important for me to understand how to run a business during troubling times. It doesn't take a great salesperson to sell houses in a good market, but it takes a great salesperson to navigate through, like I say, challenging times. And it's not just a salesperson, it's about being a business person. There's almost another category. There's one thing to selling houses, and there's another thing to being profitable. And so let me give you some tips on things that I learned going through some of the recessions. First thing I'm going to suggest to you is that, and it was said to you by your manager when you first got into real estate, but we were all supposed to have a 6-month reserve put away. And as time goes on and the longer you're in the business, we let go of that reserve fund because we don't think it's necessary anymore, because we're very confident in our day-to-day skills to go out and create more business opportunities. But here's an example how sometimes things are just out of your control. And I would go back when the going gets tough, the tough go back to the basics. So I would say, make sure you have your reserve put aside. You know, selling houses in a really great real estate market is easy. Managing a business in tough times is where it really gets challenging. To quote John F. Kennedy, a good real estate market, a rising tide raises all boats. So there are people in our industry who've never lived through a recession, and this is really unnerving for them. But in the words of Warren Buffett, when the tide goes out, we get to see who's swimming naked. Trust me when I say this, you're going to learn more about running a business right now than you have learned in the last 5 or 6 years. You're going to learn really about managing your expenses and being very thoughtful about revenue. So the first thing I'm going to say is you did your business plan in December 2019 and you forecasted your revenue and your expenses for 2020. We need to go back and take a look at the plan. You need to go back into the expense side on your personal life and on your business life, and you need to go through line item by line item to make sure that those monthly expenses are absolutely a necessity. You need to figure out what it costs to run your life, both your business and your personal life, what you have for fixed commitments that may not be adjustable, and what you can take out of the expense side. The real question I'm asking you is, how much does it cost you to run your business? And you need to be thoughtful about what expenses you're willing to commit to right now. This is all about crossing the chasm and getting to the other side. In a good market, we always had the ability, if we had an unforeseen expense, the solution was simple. Let's just go out and sell another house, we'll clean that up. But as the market retreats and there's less volume around, at least in the short term, that may not be a strategy we can necessarily apply really easily. So then it becomes more about expense management. Cash is really important in a recession. Cash is king, you've heard that saying. A business can stay in business when it's not profitable, but a business can't stay in business when it can't cash flow its short-term commitments. So it's really important to have some liquidity in terms of your overall life. And again, these are lessons we would learn in a recession, not necessarily in a really good buoyant marketplace like we've had. So agents who manage their cash well will be here to capitalize on that next marketplace. So I'm going to say, go back, take a look at your numbers, take a look at your business plan, redo your numbers, redo your personal life expenses, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, and redo your business expenses. The next thing I would recommend is that you use the Agent Success app. It's free, it's in the Apple Store, it's in Google Play, but basically what it does is it helps you manage your day-to-day activities from a revenue perspective. Take the numbers from your business plan and fill it in, put it in the app, and the app will constantly remind you where you are in reference to where you want to be. It's free, there's no charge for it. It's like having a digital coach. It will hold you accountable to the daily activities and commitments and give you an understanding of where you are on the revenue side. And then the other thing I think it's really important is the accountability side. The third thing I have for you in this list was projecting your cash flow for the next few months. We might be looking at 10 weeks in terms of shelter in place. So how much money do you have in the bank right now? You should take a look at your accounts. How much money do you have coming in deals that are firm but not yet closed? What is the expected revenue? How much, when you look at your personal and business expenses, how much money do you have going out every month? And do you have any savings? Do you have access to a line of credit? And as a last resort, of course, we have our RRSPs. These are all sort of emergency measures that are in place for a reason. Now, let's talk about strategy and staying liquid and some of the things you can do. The banks are offering, in many cases, in most cases, the deferring of mortgage payments. This is not going to affect your credit. And I know nobody likes to go and have these difficult conversations, but if you want to make sure you're liquid and you have availability and you have access to cash, then calling the bank and saying, hey, I want to postpone my mortgage payment for 6 months. Typically what they do is they just take the mortgage payments and back end load them to the amortization schedule. Second thing you want to reach out to is if you have a car lease. Again, the car lease companies are going to be offering deferral payments on this stuff, and this is going to maintain your cash so that you have your little nest egg. This will free up any interest will still accrue, like I said. You want to look at, and then when you get back and everything gets rolling again, you may come back in and make a lump sum payment and get back on the amortization schedule of where you were. The next item I have on your list is I recommend that you review your credit card statements for the last 2 months. What expenses do you have that are reoccurring and are absolutely mandatory? What expenses could you cut out of? I'll bet in some cases, some of you have Apple Music and Spotify, and you don't need both of them, or somebody still has a subscription to HBO that you haven't watched in months. Go through your credit card. Let's figure out what you don't need and what you can get rid of. Now, at the same time, be careful not to cut back too far on your business expenses. We still have to have some sort of marketing and some sort of information going out, and because it will be too hard to restart the engine from a cold start. So we want to make sure that we've got strategy in place and we are thoughtful about where and what we're sending out. For instance, our company right now, we know everybody is at home. We're increasing our social media spend. We're not decreasing it. We're looking for an opportunity to plant seeds to make connections with future business. So I'd like you to adopt the same position. Be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I want to make sure you don't cut too far back and hurt your future business opportunities. It's a balance. So you've got to add some common sense to this. Where are you spending your money and why are you spending it is the question you need to ask. And I want you to know that in terms of any other suppliers, you have an opportunity to open up conversations and renegotiate commitments with just about everybody right now. The really sharp business people are using this as an opportunity to have discussions about how they're going to reposition themselves. I have one of our coaching people in LA, for instance, went through this exercise last week based on my suggestion. And if you can imagine this, now he sells a lot of houses and he's got a busy business, but he was able to cut $7,000 a month out of his monthly operating costs. He was tickled when he went through and started to eliminate stuff. And this will give everybody an opportunity to kind of really restructure their business going forward and how you're going to go about stuff. Agents who adopt these strategies for the next few months will not only weather the storm, but you'll be set up to take advantage of the market that's coming. And there is going to be a great real estate market coming. That is absolutely certain. We had strong numbers coming into this. This virus thing wasn't something that we could have seen. It's going to sideline us, but there will be lots of pent-up demand. So trying to get something to go from an absolute stop to full speed is too hard. Let's keep the machine rolling. Let's make sure that you're in tip-top shape and that you're really ready to move things forward when the opportunity's there. There's lots of stuff we can talk about in terms of protocols, but financially it is important to make sure you're in good shape and you're managing your exposure properly. Use the time wisely. Stay apart, but stay connected with everyone. Mike, I want to open it up for Phil and I in terms of questions. And that was sort of my make sure we stay on top of it talk.
Well, I think the chat has been incredibly active, and I've been putting in notes. So I know a few people asked about the books you were recommending. I put in the chat. Somebody asked in the Q&A, and I've been chatting kind of your notes as well. So one thing I wanted to ask you, one question that came in that I thought was quite good is, I mean, what about a new agent? What about an agent who just started this year and was just building up his sphere of influence, just building up his database? And what should, you talked about reaching out and making sure everybody's okay. What should they be doing? And that comes from Neri Sekon, Royal LePage, Royal City Realty in Guelph. I think it represents probably a lot of people here today.
I think one of the strategies, there's a bunch of strategies you could do there. For instance, I have seen an agent, for instance, putting out postcards in their neighborhood saying things along the lines of, if you are sheltered in place, you're a senior, you can't get out. I'm a local real estate sales professional. I'm one of your neighbors at Royal LePage, and I would make myself available to the grocery store to pick anything up if that was something. So even if people don't access it, it's a really nice thing to do. I saw another agent where they went around to one of the local restaurants. They were, the restaurant can't be open to the public, but they're still doing takeout orders, and the business is really suffering. As a demonstration of kindness, they bought up a bunch of gift cards, not expensive ones, maybe like $10 or something like that. And they sent them out to a bunch of people in their sphere with a note that said, local restaurant businesses are really going to suffer during this time. As my show of support, I'm offering a $10 discount over at such and such restaurant. They would appreciate it. But of course, the guy who owns the restaurant or the gal is going to be very thankful that you did that. Even if I don't use the card, it was a nice, kind gesture. I've seen people who have sent notices around, the holiday weekend is coming up. If you leave food at your front door, we'll pick it up for the food bank. I'll practice all proper protocols, and I'll leave it at the local food bank for people who are not as fortunate as we are. I've seen where people are making healthcare at home, making masks, and they're putting them together, and they're putting them together for people and for the healthcare community. So there are a lot of nice things we can be doing. But for the agent that's brand new, some of this stuff is important. Warm calls to your sphere, but most of all, use this time really wisely to organize your business. Make sure your business is really, really well organized. Most of the time in real estate, when you get started, it's like spinning plates. You got 7 things going and you're trying to get a deal in there while you're doing it. Right now, you will be limited on the amount of business you can do in terms of writing business and taking listings. But boy, oh boy, could you do a lot of homework? Could you do a lot of technology stuff? Could you get your social media strategies organized, your CRM organized? I mean, there's, I'll bet you our new agent hasn't customized their digital listing presentation, their buyer services package. There's a lot of stuff we can do that normally takes us 2 or 3 years, because we're trying to juggle a whole bunch of items at the same time. This is a great opportunity to make sure you've checked all the boxes. So use it wisely.
Great, thanks. I have a question here from Brian Graham, and he's asking that, when COVID-19 is behind us in 60 to 90 days, what is your best guess for overall projected Canadian market conditions at the end of Q2, Q3, and Q4? And I suppose this is a good question for Phil as well.
Yes, I would go with Phil on that. I'll follow in behind Phil, because Phil's the voice of real estate. So we need to hear what the commander in chief has to say.
Yeah, you know what? The big unknown, of course, is the length of time of shutdown, but it's very different than other problems. Most people will remember what we call the Great Recession that Chris mentioned, which is a decade ago. The challenge in that one, and it was the fall of 2008 when it became really obvious that Canada was going to get slammed by the wave of financial collapses that was running around the world. And the big challenge was nobody had any idea when it was going to be over. Now this one actually is easier to predict. We know from what we've seen in Asia and starting to see in Europe that it will be weeks and months, not years. If you look at the Great Recession in the United States and the way it impacted the real estate industry, it was 6 years long, 6 years. We're not going through that. We know we've got weeks or months to suffer through declining business, but then things will be back. Increasingly, this looks like what you might call a narrow U recession or downturn. Very steep side on the drop, a little bit at the bottom of uncertainty, then a steep climb up the other side. Some people early on talked about a V-shaped recession where it hit hard and bounced back. It doesn't look like that now. It looks like it's going to stretch a little bit longer. So I'd see the market going through stages. There'll be the tough weeks ahead, maybe 2, maybe 4, where we're essentially doing only emergency essential services work in the communities, which is hypercritical that we do, and we do well, because there are people with great real estate needs out there, and we're going to be there for them. But normal activity levels will be really, really constrained. And then governments, provincial, federal, will want to, as soon as they can, for health reasons, let real estate back into a more normal state of affairs. And it'll be a transitionary period, because it won't be immediately back to the way it was. People will have residual fear of other people. And it's not like this virus is going to just instantly disappear completely from the world. Certainly the fear of it won't disappear. So social distancing will remain important in that transitionary time. But the big difference will be buyers in particular, and more slowly sellers, will be back in the market during that transitionary phase. And then people who were in need of real estate service, either as a seller or a buyer, will hit that tipping point. We see it in the markets every day. Today was this morning was again a boom time in the market. Why? Because things are suddenly good? No, it's anticipatory. People are feeling that maybe the markets are oversold, and we're anticipating a recovery. So when we hit that point, suddenly we're on the other side of the U, and things will start escalating rapidly. The fundamentals in Canada are so strong. I've talked about this before. Household formation is the strongest of any advanced nation on earth. We've got millennials coming in to either move up or first-time home buying. If they're in that first-time home buying group, they don't have an asset to worry about. So they are going to be itching to get in the market. They are now. They are young people with secure jobs right now are going, oh, I need to be in this market. I'm doing my civic duty and I'm staying at home, but I see an opening now and I have to get in. And there are thousands and thousands of them across the country. It takes a little bit longer to respond to the selling side of the market, because they tend to be a little bit older. And remember, they're inviting people into their homes, so they can't control other people's behavior. As a buyer, you can control your own personal behavior and you can stay safe, but you can't control other people's behavior coming into your home. So there's naturally more fear. So there'll be a little more delay on the listing side. But when it comes, I think it'll come in a flood. The big unknown, of course, is the longer this takes, how many people will be permanently out of a job, for example. The federal government is doing a fabulous job of essentially unprecedented levels of fiscal support to keep people in their jobs for the recovery. And they're not doing it because they're silly and they're just wasting money. They're doing it for smart financial reasons. It's way, way cheaper overall to keep someone, their salary topped up, and keep a company having someone on the payroll for 8 weeks than it is to put someone on unemployment insurance for months while they go look for a job completely from scratch. So this is a good investment of billions of dollars, but it should trigger a quicker recovery. So back to when this will all happen, it's really going to be, or what's going to happen at the end of this, it's really a seesaw. With, on the lift side, we'll have the cheapest money we've ever seen in our lives, a lot of fiscal stimulus in the form of really low interest rates, people with help on their mortgages, delaying their mortgages, things that Chris was talking about. So all that is lift, and pent up demand. All these people who would have been in the market and what would have been a year very much like 2016 in a lot of parts of the country, a very, very boisterous, probably uncomfortably active market in 2020. That desire for a home has not disappeared, and that'll be the lift. And the downside will be the impact of the recession, but that'll be mitigated by the steps that the government's taking. Where will this all end up? It's anybody's guess. I'll give you one data point. The Royal Bank of Canada, Robert Haig, who's an economist I admire, has suggested the overall year will end up about 70%. So down 30% from normal, which is a massive decline, by the way, 30%. But it's way better than a lot of people are thinking. Personally, from my projections would be a little bit more conservative. I'd say if you plan for, say, a 60% year, down 40% from normal, and recovering as the year goes on, you're probably into the right ball game. If someone's telling you it's going to be 10% down, I'd ask them to provide some rationale behind their thinking, because we will be out of market for a number of weeks here. And remember, it's right in the spring. It's in the busiest part of the year that we're missing. So long-winded way to answer. This too shall pass. It'll be short term. It'll be tough, but we're going to be fine coming out the other end.
Perfect. More questions, Ms. Kelly?
Sorry, I just need to unmute myself. Phil, we've also had a number of Western Canadians chiming in asking if your projections or your updates, how they will impact them, because they're not necessarily like the rest of Canada in terms of what was happening there prior to the outbreak of COVID-19.
Yeah, and of course, by Western Canadians, we have to differentiate between, for example, British Columbia and Alberta. British Columbia fits very much into the high-level perspective that Canada had, where demand for housing was far exceeding our supply. Prices were ready to take off. They being our most expensive market in Canada, BC, is twitchy. And when something like the federal stress test was put in place, the market which was very unbalanced before that in the 15 to 17 timeframe, really took a break. It was a classic price overshooting, regulatory intervention, market correction. But it was coming back. I mean, for those of you who don't follow the numbers closely, we were looking at 40 to 50% year over year volume increases every single month at the end of last year and the beginning of this year until the COVID crisis hit. In Alberta, and let's group Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland together. Things have been tougher for a number of reasons, but the primary one being the devastating effect of the 2014 plunge in oil prices. We lost 70% of the value of arguably Canada's most important export at the end of 2014. That resulted in a long, painful period for the real estate industry in those provinces. It was starting to come back in 2017 when the national stress test was put in place, and then it stumbled again. It was call it a nascent recovery. And it was coming back again at the end of 2019. Commercial real estate oversupply in Greater Calgary was being absorbed. We actually had positive commercial real estate indicators in Alberta. In other words, there was more being sold than that was being built. So we were the excess capacity was dissipating. And volumes were up 11% in Calgary, for example, when we were coming into the COVID strike. Now that's off a slow 2019, but up is up. The other thing I'd say, if you look at over the 5-year period of the difficulty in the oil industry, Calgary, again pointing to the biggest city in the West, in call it our energy driven economies, the aggregate real estate price, obviously different in different price classes and different neighborhoods, but overall lost about 10%. That's over 5 years. That's only 2% a year. There's a remarkable ability in Canada for Canadians' homes to retain their value. So even though you might see a little bit of a giveaway on prices during a recession like this, I don't expect home prices anywhere, including Alberta, to in aggregate. I'm not talking about distressed sellers that have to sell in a really tough time. I'm talking about the overall value of our housing stock. I think the value, Canadians will hang on to the value, which will give them the confidence to get back and into the market. So hopefully that helps.
Excellent.
Thanks, Phil. And one more region of the country, Quebec is asking about their unique underpinnings as well, and how they'll be impacted because, of course, they've not been counted in as an essential service.
Yeah. So if you look at the mid-March period, every province and territory in the country declared a state of emergency. And then day by day, provincial governments took a different approach to executing on that those states of emergency. The other thing, and unless you've been tracking the numbers province by province, many people outside of Quebec would not realize just how serious the early stages of this pandemic have been in Quebec. Something like 45% of all cases of COVID-19 have been in Quebec. The population of Ontario is 70% bigger than Quebec, yet there are almost double the number of cases of the disease in Quebec versus Ontario. So a much smaller province by population, our second largest province, by the way, but still much smaller than Ontario, but many more cases. So the government there had to act much more aggressively, much more like New York State in the United States. And they had to say, I'm sorry, things that we consider essential in other parts of Canada aren't going to work in Quebec. We have to really shut down the movement of people. So it's been much tougher there. It was extended to, I believe it's May 3rd or 4th by Premier Legault just over the weekend. And it was the right thing to do. So what does that mean? It means that unlike the rest of the country where there is some activity leaking through, call it the people who really, really need to sell or buy, there is virtually nothing happening in Quebec for these weeks. And so it's going to be tougher. The good news is the recovery could be even stronger in Quebec than it is in other parts of the country, because Quebec had the best provincial finances of any province in the country. I know for a lot of people, this just doesn't compute, because over the last number of decades, Quebec wasn't known for, call it, well-managed provincial finances. But the province, over both of the last two governments, and the parties changed, has produced surpluses, and the state of finances in Quebec were excellent, better than any province in the country coming into this crisis. And the housing market was so strong, it skated right through the federal stress test. Very few places in Canada did. It grew right through that stress test. The final thing I'd say that Quebec's got going for it is that average home price. You can buy two of the benchmark roll-a-page two-story detached home that we use for a benchmark cross country. You could buy two of them in Montreal for one in Toronto, and you could buy three in Montreal for one in Vancouver. So home prices for a world-class city are amazingly affordable, and affordability will help get the industry back and rolling again.
Excellent.
I want to be really mindful of the time. We have about 5 minutes left before the end of the webinar. And I know we've gotten a few other questions about what about Manitoba? What about the other provinces? Did you have anything you wanted to add? I just want to be really mindful here that we have Chris and Phil only for the next five minutes or so.
Sure. You know what? The general thesis is the same. There's no place in the country, for the first time in almost a decade, I saw all regions of the country from Alberta through to the GTA in Ontario, pulling ahead in the first quarter of 2020. Demand was strong. People were back. Our biggest concern was lack of inventory. There was too much demand for our services and our product. So no matter where you are in the country, again, back to something Chris mentioned, a rising tide raises all ships. This tide was rising across Canada, and it will rise again.
Excellent.
Thanks, Phil. One question for that either of you could answer. Do we expect to see a spike in power of sale volume? And how could that be an opportunity that our realtors across the country could leverage?
I'll give you my take, Phil, and then I'd be really happy to hear yours. But I think the government has put enough stuff in place to protect the short term. And assuming that we're back, within 3-4 months, back to where, back to work again, I'm not seeing that level of negative impact. I'm seeing a lot of uncertainty in the short term, but I'm seeing us coming back. Prior to this happening, like Phil said, everything was firing on all 8 cylinders across the country. So I'd like to even think if we came back at 60 or 70% of capacity, we would still be really busy. So I'm not seeing that, Phil, but you tell me, you're better with the data than I am. What's your thoughts?
Agree completely. Canada's default rate on mortgages was probably the lowest in the world coming into this. It was 0.24 of 1%. So less than 0.25% of all mortgages went into default. To put that in perspective, the United States has been improving for a decade since their financial system collapsed. Their default rate was 11 times worse or greater than ours coming into this recession. So I don't see that as a material opportunity, and that's a good thing.
Yes.
Great. Probably our final question now. This one is for Chris. When you're working with buyers who are fearful in working with you right now, do you have any tips or suggestions on how to make that process as smooth, healthy, and safe as possible?
Understand that purchasing a property, in my mind or my opinion, is an emotional decision. So people, even though they say, you know what, we want to wait, and I would say to them, I understand why you might feel that way. I think it would be wise if I at least kept you informed. Should we see anything out there that piques your curiosity, let's have a conversation. So I would continue to be sending real estate listings to them, and I would be still having conversations, assuming just for argument's sake, they picked something that they thought they were interested in. Then I would have showing protocols in place and saying, let's start with the videography, the photography, the Matterport. Let's maybe take a look at the neighborhood, the walkability factor, all of those things. Is this the right property? If it was, and it really was sort of on the short list, then reaching out to the listing agent and saying maybe the first step might be to have the homeowner FaceTime us live through the property beyond just the photos that have taken. So let's FaceTime me live through and see what that looks like. That being the case, we can negotiate an offer on the property subject to me coming in for a viewing. So let's get all of the complexities around the negotiations out of the way. And then if we do have a deal and everybody's agreed, the one final condition will be that I get to walk through the property. Now, the reality of that, and I know it sounds far-fetched, but the last house I bought using FaceTime. The agent called me from the property. They were doing an initial walkthrough. They hadn't even listed it for sale. And they said, I think this one you're going to really like. They FaceTimed me. I said, call the seller, find out how much they want. We did a deal. The only condition was that I came and had a look at the property before we bought it. So I can tell you
during the crisis, Chris, or before?
That was way before. That was 4 years ago, and it was a place in Florida. So, I wanted a little place down there, and the agent just walked through and FaceTimed me. And I said, you know what? Ask the lady how much. And she called me back and I said, well, let's do a deal on it. And I'll get down in the next 2 days to have a look if that's the only condition. So I'm a firsthand example, without even being pushed into that situation, that it's really doable. It works. It does work. It can work.
Well, maybe I could throw a little supplementary onto that. Everybody by now in the Royal LePage company will have heard of RLP Sphere, which is our next generation digital platform. It has been under development for a year now. It launches this spring. It is not lost on me that this thing was ahead of its time. It was designed to make the mobile Royal LePage Professional more productive, to allow you to use whatever device was in your hand, be it smartphone, tablet, sitting at a desk, wherever you were. It's cloud-based, it's AI driven, allowing you, if this thing had launched in January, unfortunately it didn't, you would be going, wow, it's way easier to operate my practice with these tools than I believe possible. So to your point, Chris, you use that tool not because of any health crisis, but because it was the efficient way to do it. I think we're going to come out of this having learned things and be able to leverage something like RLP Sphere as never before.
That's excellent. Excellent, excellent. One last note, and then we'll jump off. I was taught a long time ago to make sure I had 6 months in reserve, and that the real estate market moves in threes: 3 good years, 3 bad years, and 3 average years. So we got 3 great ones, 3 good ones, and 3 average ones. A mentor of mine taught me that 40 years ago. In a 10-year cycle, if you look at the number of recessions we've had, they typically break down in 10. It takes a little while to get it heated up. We have a really hot market, and then on the other side, it slows back down again, and the cycle continues to go around.
Good advice. Over to you, Kelly. Mike, thanks everybody out there. We'll see you again next week. But Chris, that was amazing.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you very much.
Thank you both so much for your time today. Just reading through the chat, everybody is extremely thankful, getting a lot of value. So much love to you, Chris, and your organization for lending your time today. And Phil, wonderful to have you. So thanks so much.
Okay, guys.
Take care,
stay
everybody.
in touch.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.